Hey, welcome to Walk Through Voices. This is such an exciting part of the Word of God that we are reading through this month. Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, Job, the beginning of Psalms. Today I want to talk to you about the Book of Esther. This is such a great book, and I want to invite you to ask God to give you an Esther mindset. It's a perspective. It's a way of viewing life. It's a filter to view contemporary events through even your local relationships. You know, things are tough in the book of Esther. An evil man named Haman has gotten the ear of the king, and he's going to exterminate all of God's people, the Israelites, or the Jews we would call them today. There's nothing new about anti-Semitism. And a man named Mordecai finds out about this plot, and he appeals to a relative of his named Esther, who is actually the queen of the king. How she became queen, that part they didn't hit in Sunday school when I was growing up. That does not carry a G rating. That's some complicated, complex stuff. You'll enjoy reading that through adult eyes. But Esther has an opportunity to intervene, and Mordecai says to her, Esther, you got to tell the king what Haman has planned. The king has been deceived. You got to help him to see truth. And Esther basically says, well, there's such a thing as protocol in the palace. I cannot just enter in to the king's throne room and say, hey, I got something's on my mind. I have to wait and be called. That's probably a legit excuse, but I think she's also going, this really doesn't affect me. Because these Jews, he doesn't even know I'm Jewish. I'm sorry this is happening, Mordecai, but it's really not my problem. Well, there's some dialogue back and forth, but in chapter 4, verse 12, we pick up the story, and it says, and they told Mordecai what Esther had said, that she says, I'm sorry, I can't or won't help. Then Mordecai told them to reply to Esther, do not think to yourself that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all the other Jews. For if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. In other words, God's plan is sovereign. It's not dependent on any one of us as individuals. God's going to find a way for His agenda, His prophecies to be fulfilled, for His plan for the world to come true. But Esther, you and your family, you'll get destroyed if you don't step up and play your role. And you'll also miss out on a great opportunity. He continues on and he says, and who knows, whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this. Esther ultimately changes her mind. She does intervene, and God's people are saved. And if you have Jewish friends, they still celebrate the Feast of Purim, which honors Esther's courage, her deep faith. But don't jump past that and get to the end of the story. Look at the struggle that's in her heart. Is this really my problem? Is this worth the risk for me? But Mordecai's question, how do you know God didn't put you in this strategic place of influence for this one moment in time? Esther, this ought to be your one shining moment. And in fact, ultimately it was. I'll never forget years ago while we still had young kids at home, I'm traveling all over the world for Walk Through the Bible, and very, very rarely could Ellen go with me. She was just neck deep with little kids, and I came home on from one trip, and I think I had been to Ukraine and Russia on that trip, if I remember right. And she just had this joy about her, and I said, don't you wish you could have been with me? And she goes, no, not really. Someday, but not now. And she says, while you're going all over to the world, she says, I realized while you were gone, God has brought the world to our cul-de-sac. The people to our left were from India. The people to our right, they were from Beijing, China. Next to them, from Tehran, Iran. Back diagonally through there, I'll never forget, Philip came home one day and goes, I made a new friend. And we just go, where's he from? And he says, I think China. What's his name? Gustavo. No, Gustavo was not from China. Gustavo was from Costa Rica. Next to them was a family from Vietnam. Ellen said, God has brought the world to our cul-de-sac. Essentially, she was saying, I think God has put me right here for such a time as this. And it wasn't long after that before every week our minivan was full of kids from all different ethnic backgrounds headed to a kids ministry at our church. They're participating in the children's musicals. The parents came. The parents heard the good news of Jesus Christ because my wife got an Esther mindset. You know, I think God gave you the locker that you have at your school. I think God has placed you in where you sit at work, those cubicles that we hate. Why can't I have a real office? That person next to me who is struggling, going through that bitter divorce, how do you know God didn't put you right there to bring an encouragement for such a time as this? God is still looking for men and women and boys and girls to play the role of Esther, to intervene, to stand up for what is right. And as you read through the book of Esther this week, I think you will be challenged. But don't just read it as history. Read it with the question, what cultural capital has God entrusted to me? What influence? Where do I live? What resources do I have? What job experience do I have? How do I know that God didn't put me right where I am for such a time as this? If you want some help as you're reading through this, go to walkthrough.org/Year of the Bible. And together, this is not supposed to be an individual sport. Let's read through this together and see what God reveals to us, not just as individuals, but also as a church right now. Enjoy your reading this week. We'll see you next time right here on Walk Through Voices.